Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us for today's virtual launch of the preview on NAP Trends, a platform for analyzing the latest information and trends in National Adaptation Plans, or NAPs. My name is Anne Hamill, and I'm the Senior Director of the Resilience Program at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which hosts the National Adaptation Plan, or NAP Global Network. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, the NAP Global Network is an initiative that works to enhance national adaptation planning and action in developing countries. Funding for the NAP Global Network has been provided by Canada, Germany, Ireland, United States, United Kingdom, and Austria. Established in 2014, the network today connects over 1,600 participants from more than 155 countries. And we provide support for the NAP process by supporting national level action and have delivered technical assistance on the NAP process to over 55 countries. We also facilitate South-South peer learning and exchange on NAP processes, and we generate, synthesize, and share knowledge on what makes for effective NAP processes. Over the last 7 years and through these activities, we have been working to highlight the role of NAP processes as the foundation for effective adaptation action. These processes drive coordination, set policy priorities, mobilize resources, allocate support, and track progress in countries' efforts to achieve their adaptation goals. The urgency of scaling up adaptation action has never been greater as we continue to see the news of climate disasters, like Cyclone Batsirai that hit southeastern African countries last week, and hear reminders from the latest science, including that from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, that some climate impacts are inevitable and irreversible. In an effort to better support and accelerate NAP processes, we decided to develop the NAP Trends database and information platform, which was developed through financial support from Global Affairs Canada. Setting up this database has been a long-time hope and ambition for us at the NAP Global Network Secretariat to better distill and understand the information that countries have captured in their national adaptation plans and share it with adaptation practitioners from around the world. By sharing our analysis of different thematic trends in NAPs, like gender equality, conflict and peace building, nature-based solutions, in this database, along with more basic high-level information about climate risks and sectors and adaptation actions contained in NAP documents, we hope to contribute to the adaptation community's understanding of NAP processes. We're really thrilled to share with you today a preview of this database and information platform. As we present these findings, though, please note the difference between NAP documents and NAP processes. Only 30 NAP documents have been submitted, but 129 NAP processes are underway in developing countries. NAP documents don't necessarily include all of the details of what's happening in a particular country, but they are a very useful snapshot of how countries are approaching their adaptation planning processes, and the trends are helpful in seeing the bigger picture of adaptation needs and priorities. The platform is in the last stages of its development and will go live in the coming weeks, so we thought it was a good time to introduce it to our members and partners. So next on the agenda will be a presentation by Angie Daze, who's a Senior Policy Advisor and the lead for gender equality with the NAP Global Network Secretariat at IISD. And Christian Ledwell, who's the manager of the NAP Global Network and will run us through a skill testing quiz. Angie, over to you.
Thanks, Anne. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to NAP Trends to give you a sense of what it looks like and what it offers. The purpose of the platform is to synthesize and share information and trends in NAPs. We have 3 objectives in establishing the platform. The first is to raise awareness of both progress on and content of NAP documents that have been submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The NAP documents themselves are available on the UNFCCC website under the NAP Central portal, but here we provide concise, systematic overviews that we hope make the information more accessible. We also wanted to provide inspiration for countries that are seeking practical examples of how other governments are approaching their NAP documents. And lastly, we wanted to disseminate information on key themes and trends in NAP documents. As Anne mentioned, we've been analyzing these documents and tracking the trends for a while now, and we felt it was a good time to make this information available to the adaptation community. This is what it looks like when you arrive on the platform. When it goes live, you'll be able to access it from the NAP Global Network website. So the homepage has a few key statistics, and you'll also find this information within the platform. The platform incorporates three key elements. The first is NAPs by country, which provides concise overviews of NAP documents. The second is trends in NAP documents, which looks at the trends in different aspects of the documents in terms of the structure of the plans themselves, the approach to adaptation, and how they address enabling factors, among other things. And thirdly, we have trends in key themes, which analyzes how countries are approaching themes such as gender, conflict and peace building, and private sector engagement. You have two ways to navigate into these areas from the homepage. You can go in from the top menu or from the buttons at the bottom of the graphics. When you arrive at the NAPs by country page, you'll see a listing of all of the countries that have submitted NAPs to the UNFCCC. Currently, the database includes information for 30 NAPs. And I should note here that we are focusing on multi-sector NAPs, so we haven't included the NAP for Uruguay, which is on NAP Central, as it focuses on the agricultural sector only. When you're on this page, you can click on a country to see an overview of their NAP. And when you do so, this is what you'll see first. This is the Albania NAP overview. You can use the icons across the top to explore different aspects of the country's NAP document. So let's say, for example, that you wanted to know how Albania treated capacity development in its NAP. You'd click on Enabling Factors at the top, and this is what you'd see. Albania has addressed capacity development through a dedicated section in the NAP document, and it's also an adaptation priority and integrated throughout the document. They target a number of different actors with capacity development, including civil society organizations, government service providers, and the media, among others. So you'll find the same information for all of the NAP documents on the platform. And we've tried to systematize the information as much as possible. So I should note that this is a bit challenging because every country approaches their NAP document differently. But we thought this kind of systematic summary was important in order to help us to track the trends. When you go to the Trends in NAP Documents page, you'll see a set of different types of trends that you can explore. So let's say that you wanted to know more about how countries are dealing with monitoring and evaluation in their NAP documents. You'd click on Monitoring and Evaluation at the top, and you'd see a few statistics. So for example, you'd find that 40% of NAPs include an M&E framework in their NAP document, and 60% include a commitment to progress reporting on adaptation. When you come to the trends in key themes, you have a range of different topics to explore, including sector integration, vertical integration, and nature-based solutions. For example, here you might want to know how countries are addressing national to subnational linkages in adaptation processes. You'd click on vertical integration and you'd learn that 90% of NAPs mention subnational actors. All of these mention communities, while a significant number also recognize subnational government authorities and local organizations. There's much, much more to explore in the platform, but this was just to provide you with a quick overview. And with that, I'll hand it to Christian, who's going to take us into the next step.
Thanks so much, Angie. And so in our next section, we'll test your knowledge of NAP aptitude and your knowledge of the trends in national adaptation plans. We're going to run through a quiz on Mentimeter. So the link will be in the chat, but much appreciated if you could go to menti.com and enter the code 39991548. So the link again, either in another browser in your another window in your browser or on your phone, please go to menti.com and type in the code 39991548. Great. So as people get registered, and also just to say, great to see a number of familiar names and if not faces in the chat. Please do feel free to contribute your questions in the chat as you get registered and into the Menti as well, as this section will be followed by a Q&A. So our first question is, out of the 30 multi-sector NAPs submitted to the UNFCCC as of the end of 2021, how many of these were from African countries? We've already seen, so we're getting a range of responses already, from a low of 5 to a high of 18. One person is hedging their bets on 9 to 11, and a few in the middle of the scale between 7 and 10. And so the correct number, if we can go back to the presentation, is that 9 of the NAPs so far communicated to the UNFCCC have been from African countries. These countries are Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Kenya, Liberia, South Africa, South Sudan, Sudan, and Togo. And a bonus NAP fact is that Burkina Faso was the first developing country to submit a NAP to the UNFCCC, and that was in October of 2015. So our second question, which climate hazards or changes are most commonly identified in NAPs? And so we have a few options to select from: droughts, floods, changes in participation patterns, or sea level rise. Great, and thanks so much for the strong participation here. It's great to see the answers coming in. And so we're seeing floods out front first, ahead of droughts. A few people for changes in precipitation patterns, and one person for sea level rise. So we'll give it another moment for a few more answers. Great, so floods have been the popular favorite, with droughts and changes in precipitation patterns in a tie. This is actually somewhat of a trick question. The real answer is a tie between droughts and floods, both of which are named in all 30 of the National Adaptation Plan documents on NAP Central. The least identified climate hazard or change is the thawing of permafrost, which is only identified in one National Adaptation Plan so far, which is the Nepal's NAP. And then there are a number of other hazards that have been identified as well. For our third question, you've already heard that Albania included this, but out of the 30 NAPs, what percentage do you think have included or discussed capacity development? Is it 50%, 73%, or 100% of NAPs? And again, we're seeing number of votes for both 73 and 100, and none so far for 50%. Okay, we'll give it one more second, but it seems the strong favorite is 100%. And the answer is indeed 100% of national adaptation plans that have discussed capacity development. Now, within that, this obviously being a very important aspect of adaptation planning and implementation, within that kind of broader sample, there are a number of different ways that that capacity development is being addressed in the different documents. In 50% of the documents, capacity development is an adaptation priority. In 73% of NAPs, it's being included as a cross-sectoral or strategic priority. In 73, it's capacity development is integrated throughout the document. And in a smaller number, 13%, capacity development is included as a dedicated section. And note that the categories here are not mutually exclusive. And as Andrew was mentioning, we are trying to systemize an approach, recognizing that countries are, each NAP is unique and country driven. And so systematizing the way that capacity development is portrayed does involve some, combining different categories together in some cases. For question number 4, if you can tell us in Menti, what do you think is the average number of priority sectors that have been identified in National Adaptation Plan documents? Do you think that most National Adaptation Plan documents have, or across the sample, is it 6 sectors, 9 sectors, or 12 sectors? Great, so we see one vote for 12 sectors, 12 votes for 6 sectors, and 24 votes for 9 sectors. And the answer for this question is that the average number of sectors that are prioritized is actually 9 across the 30 NAPs that have been communicated. And again, to take a look at the detail of which sectors are seen in most NAPs, or where the common trends are, agriculture, crops, livestock, or food security are included in 100% of the National Adaptation Plans that have been communicated to date. Water or sanitation has been included in almost all National Adaptation Plans, and health is the 3rd most common sector that has been prioritized. I'm also seeing ecosystems, biodiversity, environment, or natural resources as a very common sector to be prioritized, as well as infrastructure. And so our 5th question is, what percentage of National Adaptation Plans do you think reference gender or mention gender? So we see one vote for, or a number of votes for 97%, 6 votes for 70%, and 7 votes for 83%. Seeing a fairly even split between the 3 options given. For this question, the correct answer is 97% of National Adaptation Plans that mention gender. And the context for these mentions of gender differs similar to capacity development across the different documents. This chart shows the number of National Adaptation Plans rather than percentages. And you can see that 17 documents have included gender equality as an objective. 16 National Adaptation Plans have included gender as a guiding principle. 11 have included gender as a priority sector or adaptation option, and 10 National Adaptation Plans have included gender as a cross-cutting issue. Our 6th question is, how many of the National Adaptation Plans out of 30 do you think have mentioned sustainable development goals under Agenda 2030? Is it 19 National Adaptation Plans, 22, or 29? So seeing a lot of votes at the high end of the scale, and a few votes for 19 or 22. So the answer here may surprise some of the folks online. The correct answer here is actually that 22 of the 30 NAPs have referenced the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see here how a number of other processes or documents related to sustainable development have been referenced. 24 out of the 30 reference nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. 16 reference the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. 13 reference the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. And only 3 so far have referenced a country's adaptation communication to the UNFCCC, a newer player on the reporting landscape. And to note that Timor-Leste has used their National Adaptation Plan as their adaptation communication vehicle. So as our final question, as part of the quiz section of today's event, we'd like to open it up to you and to hear from you, what trends in National Adaptation Plans are you most interested in learning more about? And so this is short answer questions, so it'd be great to hear from around the participants here on this event, what you're most interested in learning and tracking in National Adaptation Plans. Thank you. So a few initial responses so far. Water, nature, gender equality, conflict sensitivity, inclusivity, justice, financing, private sector engagement, insurance. and indicators. So seeing quite a wide range and of quite important topics, loss and damage also being referenced in a number of national adaptation plans. We're seeing several different types of ecosystems, including peatlands and land use change, which is a sector that's prioritized in at least one of the national adaptation plans. Good practices, so looking to national adaptation plans that have documented what's working, what isn't working for peer learning. And seeing a few votes for conflict, which is interesting to see how the links between peace building and adaptation planning can be strengthened. So this is really, and human rights also quite an important component or a theme that can be tracked within national adaptation plans. So thanks so much for participating in this quiz and for this really helpful feedback. I'm now going to pass back to Anne for the question and answer section of this event, and it'd be great to hear from you. For any questions, please just add them into the chat box. Thanks, and over to you, Anne.
Great, thanks so much, Christian. And yes, happy to take questions now on the database and any sorts of queries that you would like to make about the information that's contained in this database and information platform. I see that a few questions have already come in. And we had one, I think, about the processes followed by different countries in preparing the map. So in terms of an overview, so maybe I should be clear that there isn't a lot of information contained on the actual processes followed by individual countries in developing their NAP documents, because that information isn't actually usually readily available in the actual documents themselves. But the NAP process, we understand from our engagement with countries, for example, the processes that are underway in developing these documents. And the generic process that is often followed is the sort of the planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, and then the planning having sort of the vulnerability and risk assessments, the identification of adaptation options, prioritization, selection, and then implementation. And then, like I said, the tracking of the progress and effectiveness of these adaptation options. But the sort of overarching process, I don't believe has been necessarily tracked. I don't know if Angie or Christian, you would want to weigh in on sort of the process related questions at this point.
No, I think you've captured it well. And I mean, we've looked, because we're analyzing documents, we've looked more at how countries are structuring their NAP documents in terms of, many are using a sectoral organization. Quite a number also have sort of cross-cutting or strategic priorities. And I think that tells us something about the process. But as you said, the full process is often not elaborated in the document itself.
I see a question here about conflicts and how they're mentioned in the NAPs. Whether it's conflicts that would stand in the way of adaptation or conflicts that might result from the implementation of adaptation actions. Angie, Christian, what can you say about conflicts in the 30 NAPs that have been communicated?
So what we found is that 57% of NAPs do mention conflict when they're talking about their sort of adaptation priorities. This is often almost half mention conflict that may result from climate impacts, so the risk of conflict arising from the impacts of climate change. There are a few that mention conflict as a driver of vulnerability, and a few that mention the need for adaptation action to be conflict sensitive, but that's a smaller number, both the 3 and 4 documents. So not as many. Countries are recognizing conflict as an issue, but maybe not so much including it in the actions. We only see 3 documents that mention adaptation as a means of conflict prevention or peace building so far.
I see that there's also a question about taking a system lens to address adaptation need. I don't know if sort of systemic approaches is something that's been flagged for consideration in the database.
The quick answer is no. I think most countries are taking more of a sector-based approach, as I mentioned, often with cross-cutting or strategic priorities as well. So those cross-cutting and strategic priorities look maybe more at a systematic approach. We also see countries taking more like a thematic approach. So they're not going with strict sectors, but looking at themes. But as far as sort of really a systems lens to the whole process, I would say that's not something that we've seen just yet.
Christian, one of the quiz topic or questions was on SDGs. And so is it, is there anything that you can say about how the SDG issues were actually tracked? Like how we're counting whether or not SDGs are addressed in NAP documents and included in the database?
Sure. So thanks for that, Anne. And Angie, I think you'd have feel free to jump in if you'd like to to as well. But I think that of course the National Adaptation Planning priorities are incredibly relevant for the SDGs, and I think that because the way that this is being tracked is really looking at kind of references directly within the document, it's more of an indicator that that these processes might not be being aligned as intentionally or strategically as they could yet. And so maybe, although that the adaptation measures will contribute to the achievement of the SDGs, that kind of direct and intentional alignment hasn't happened yet in some of the national adaptation plans.
Just a couple of questions here on how often do we plan to update the database, and looking into NAP implementation as well? What can we say on those 2 points?
I can provide a bit of an update here. So currently we've got the database up to date with all the NAPs that were submitted up to the end of 2021. I think we anticipate that there will be a steady flow of NAP documents coming in over the coming years. And also countries who are beginning to update their NAP documents. So the idea is to keep the database up to date, on a sort of a quarterly basis to make sure that all the NAPs that are entered in that quarter are entered. And as far as implementation, I would say I think that would be difficult to track in a database of this type. Again, we're reviewing NAP documents here, and so we're sort of limited to the information that's available within those documents. And I think doing that allows us to do this systematization and the tracking of trends by focusing strictly on the content that's in the document. But I would say that the NAP Global Network more broadly, we are tracking implementation of NAPs, and that's something that we'll continue to be keeping an eye on. And I don't know if you wanted to add to that, but just to say this platform is one piece of our sort of puzzle of tracking NAP processes more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, obviously through the other types of support that we provide to countries, whether it's the peer learning opportunities or direct technical support, we are tracking sort of how NAP processes are playing out in countries, and especially I think of particular interest more recently is that transition from planning to implementation. And in fact, that's a big priority for the network out to 2025, is accompanying countries and making that transition from planning to implementation, sort of demystifying and unpacking what that transition really is and what it involves. And basically making the argument that it's more than just writing a series of proposals and trying to get secure financing, but there is a sort of set of skills and capacities and conversations and other sort of nested processes that are involved in that transition. And so that is an area of focus for us. But for this database, where it's really focused on the NAP documents that have been communicated. So it would be difficult for us to sort of track how those documents translate into action, so to speak. Other questions. We've got here the details that are analyzed under monitoring and evaluation. Are we looking at methodologies and which countries intend to evaluate their NAPs? Angie, would you be able to weigh in on that? You'd sort of mentioned monitoring and evaluation in your presentation.
Sure, and I think this is another case where the platform provides a small snapshot of the information, but this is another issue that we're going to be tracking more broadly and also working with countries on in the coming years. But as far as the platform goes, again, we're trying to focus on details that we can systematize and use to track trends. So we looked at, does the NAP include an M&E framework? We looked at, do they have indicators? Do they commit to progress reporting? Do they commit to updating the NAP? But on the platform, you won't find sort of all the details of their M&E framework or the indicators that they've included, for example, because we're trying to sort of do this higher level summary and systematization to track the trends. But that is another issue where, as the NAP Global Network, we are tracking that and keeping an eye on how countries are approaching this and supporting them, providing them with technical support as they do move forward on MEL systems for their NAP processes.
I see questions here around whether or not we are tracking anything to do with green growth in the NAP documents and NDC NAP alignment. Maybe one thing I can say to folks is, what we've, the database that's going to be going live in a couple of weeks doesn't cover all the issues. And from what I can see in the questions, it's not going to cut, like my understanding is we haven't tracked explicitly green growth, for example, like we haven't looked for explicit mentions of green growth. Now, depending on what the response is to this database and sort of the requests that we're getting and how we're finding or hearing about people using it, the functionality of it, there is opportunities to build on this and sort of try to track additional issues going forward. But we're going to have some parameters around this. We're not going to track absolutely everything, I don't think. I don't think that's going to be possible, especially as we get more and more NAPs that are communicated, and we have to go through all of these documents and be able to pull this information and enter it into the database. But if there are sort of certain issues that are, that we're hearing are absolutely critical that should be tracked in NAP documents, these can be added to the database going forward. There is that flexibility. So it's just sort of going to be figuring out which ones really feel like priorities and sort of taking the temperature on where the sort of NAP conversation is and the global policy conversation around adaptation is, and figuring out what's sort of feasible to help maintain this database and make it sort of as current as possible. In terms of NAP NDC alignment, I believe, Christian, you had mentioned in your quiz that this is something that we're tracking. We do track mentions of NDCs in NAP documents. I don't know if there's anything further that you would add to that, Christian or Angie?
Sure, happy to jump in on that one. So I think that, so I can share a link to some of the other work we've done on NDC NAP alignment, but just to mention that the UNFCCC's synthesis reports analyzing the enhanced NDCs did note that there's an uptick in the references to NAPs in enhanced NDCs. And so hopefully this can be kind of a dialogue between NDCs and NAPs as well, that NDCs are making more links to NAPs and vice versa. As these documents are elaborated and when countries are choosing to include an adaptation component in the NDC. I think that if I can respond to the earlier question on NAP process versus NAP document as well, I think that this is something we've really tried to emphasize in our work, that as much as the NAP document is a great milestone, it's really the process underpinning it that is that we focus a lot of our work and knowledge products on. And so I think that, recognizing that the NAP documents will be produced iteratively, the kind of value add of really focusing on what's in NAP documents and tracking these trends is to try to pull out the lessons and, as one person put in the quiz, really figure out what are the good practices in terms of preparing a National Adaptation Plan document to capture some of what's happening in the process and the strong governance strengthening that's happening. Thanks.
Great. There are a couple of questions on the sort of technical aspects of the platform from what I can see. So we had one earlier on about, if you can sort of search for nature-based solutions and if it'll sort of bring up the list of countries that mention nature-based solutions. And then there's another question further down about, interrogating specific words in the NAP. So at this point, what can we share with participants on this webinar, Angie?
Sure. So I guess what's important to understand is there's a database which is password protected. And then from that database comes all of the information that is available on the NapTrends platform that we've shared with you today. And so at present, what shows up on the NapTrends platform is a selection of analysis from the information that's contained in the database. So currently, there's not the option for users to search specific terms or to manipulate the data. What we wanted to do was to really create a platform to share these trends as a first step. This has been a pretty huge undertaking, and we're really excited to have gotten it to this point. So I think the idea now is to get it out there, and then, as Anne said, we're looking for feedback on what users would want to see, and we're certainly open to further developing the platform and providing more options should resources be available. As people start to use it and realize what they would like to get out of it.
Maybe also to add to that, I think when this goes live too, I think it'll be accompanied with some information on exactly, what definition, like what the specific terms were that are used to sort of, like how the different sort of search terms, the definitions, the methodology behind presenting the trends as well. So people have a clear understanding of what kind of information was pulled out from the documents. So that will be also made available to users as well. So yeah, there's an understanding of what sort of lies behind the sort of presentation of trends. I don't know if there are other questions here, maybe on sectors. And yeah, I didn't know, Angie, if you had mentioned that we had a sectoral NAP that wasn't considered in this initial intake of 30. And I think there have been a couple of questions about, a recognition that there are more and more sectoral NAPs that are being developed. My broad sort of general answer to that is we're sort of watching this space. And at this point, we're looking at sort of the more overarching multi-sectoral NAPs that are being communicated. But again, we're sort of watching the evolution or the trends in this sort of adaptation planning space. I don't know if there's anything you would add to that, Christian or Angie.
Maybe just to say that, one of the reasons that we haven't at this point included sector-specific NAPs is that it would require a different methodology to review them. We couldn't just take the same methodology and apply it to a sector NAP because the kinds of things that we're interrogating often might not be there, and that might give the wrong impression that something is missing when actually it's not relevant for that particular sector or that particular planning document. So I think that if we were to incorporate sector-specific NAP documents in the future, that would require us to develop sort of a more tailored methodology in order to review those.
I think that's all the time we actually have for questions. I was actually not sure that we'd need the full 45 minutes with the quickness through which we went through the presentations, but lots and lots of questions, which is really appreciated. And it's great to also get a sense of what questions you're asking about the NAPs as well. So please keep those questions coming. And as I mentioned, this platform will be going live in a couple of weeks. But I just wanted to thank Christian and to all of you, of course, Angie, and to all the participants for the questions. And before closing, we just wanted to provide a quick overview of next steps. So as mentioned, we've entered all the data for all the NAP documents that were submitted to the UNFCCC by the end of 2021. On this, I'd really like to thank our colleague, Julia Donaldson, for her tireless efforts in reviewing the documents and inputting the data. And she was helped by our colleagues, David Hoffman and Patrick Guerdad as well, so thanks to them as well. And then we're also grateful to DE Design and Environment for working with us in developing the platform. The website will go live around the end of February, and we will share a link with all participants at the time, and we'll also announce it on our social media feeds. And over the coming months, we'll be working to iron out any technical issues and doing a few upgrades to the site. And we'll keep updating the data as new NAPs are submitted to the UNFCCC. And we're planning for a formal launch later this year, hopefully if there is a NAP Expo, but that's to be determined, I guess. And so with that, I want to thank everybody again. And we're looking forward to staying in touch. So take care, everybody, and thanks again.